Hi guys, welcome back. So in this video we're going to continue building our labs. As I said earlier, server 1 and server 2 really don't have any particular requirements, but for some of the labs that we're going to complete, we do need to take some extra steps. So the steps that we're going to take right now are really not going to affect any particular lab, but they will be required when we start working with Kerberos NFS. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to take server 1 and server 2, and then we're going to have them configure to use the identity management server for authentication. That way, by the time we start doing the NFS labs and we need to protect our NFS shares using Kerberos, then one of the requirements is that the servers are already joined the IPA server, so they know how to find the Kerberos realm, and that way you don't have any issues. The other things that you can do to work around it, but anyway, that's really not the right way to do it. The correct way to do it is really joining the server to your IPA server and making sure that you can use your LDAP for authentication, that you can use Kerberos for authentication. One thing that I also wanted to do is to bring you a couple of warnings. Warning because I found some differences between Red Hat Enterprise 7.0 and Red Hat Enterprise 7.2.3. So that at the time of this video, Red Hat Enterprise 7.3 is available, but it's important that I highlight some of those differences as we go along, particularly with when we start working with NFS. I want to make sure that we test the right way to configure Kerberos NFS on 7.0 and then also 7.2 or 7.3, which basically there's not that many differences as far as I know. So there are other differences that we're going to see today, and I'm going to mention them. But again, for those of you who want to take the RHCE exam, I really don't know what version of Red Hat you're going to find on your lab. So it's important that you're familiar with all of them. So I reckon that you might find version 7.0, or maybe 7.2, or 0.3, or 0.1, or whatever. So you might want to be ready. This is the whole point of the lab. The whole point of the lab is for us to learn. And since you're building VMs, virtual machines, really there's no real damage, right? On having some servers on version 7.0, and then build a couple of servers on version 7.3, and see if there's any differences that you can tell, and get familiar with the configuration on at least in those both major versions, right? So right now, server 1 and server 2, I'm going to configure those two servers using version 7.0, yes. And you will see that there are not a lot of differences, but you will see a few of them. So what we do today, we're going to add the servers to the identity management server, so we can use that LDAP account that we mentioned earlier. And I'm also going to configure AutoFS so we can mount the home directory for that LDAP user 1 account. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and log in on server 1, and we're going to start by giving the server a name, right? So hostname CTL, and then we're going to name it server01.mygsdlabs.local, right? Sorry, set hostname. I missed that one. Set hostname. Okay. All right, so that's going to give us a host name. If we exit out of there, we log in, log back in, then we see that the server is already configured with the right name, server 01. So the next step is to configure our TCP IP settings. And the reason why I don't want to leave them as DHCP is because I want to make sure that I use the LDAP server as the DNS server. So we can, do, remember that the LDAP server is running bind with DNS, and it's hosting some of the service records that are going to be used to find some of the services that the LDAP server offers. One of them being Kerberos, and you will see as we do the configuration that we really need them to find the Kerberos realm using DNS and whatnot. So let's use nmcli connection show, and let's see what kind of connection do we have here. And we see that we have ENO 16.7.7, then 36. All right, let's configure that interface. nmcli connection modify ENS, then IPv4 address. And here's one difference between 7.0 and then 7.1, then 7.2 and 7.3. In 7.2 and 7.3, if you notice, you do have an option to do IPv4 gateway. In 7.0, you don't have that option. In 7.0, you're expected to enter with a IPv4 address, the IP address and the gateway on the same line. So we do column and then 172.16.19, and then we give this server an IP address of 7/24, and the default gateway, you hit space and then you enter the default gateway 172.16.19, and my default gateway in this case will be the 2, and then we close and enter, and that went fine. All right, so next thing is DNS, right? We need a DNS address, and we're gonna give that we're gonna configure a DNS as the IPA server, which, if you remember from the previous video, it was 172.16.19.5, and that should do it. The next thing is we need to make sure that the method is set to manual. Done. The next, now we're going to make sure that the configuration comes back up. So nmcli connection down, and then we see and then nmcli connection up, then same thing, right? That should do it. Now we need to install a couple of packages, and two of the packages are going to be for us to be able to use auth config and configure LDAP authentication and Kerberos authentication. Now, if you don't want to memorize the package that you need, you certainly don't have to. If you are missing any packages that you run auth config, it will give you a warning. It will tell you that you're missing some packages that you need to install. At that point, you can exit out of the tool and then install the packages that you need, right? So, but for now, since I have that information fresh, we will install. Let's see. I remember. I think it's NSS, and then let's see what we have here. NSS, and then we have PAM LDAP, and then we need PAM key PAM, and then we need underscore QRB5. Okay. I also need AutoFS, so let's just go ahead and install it right now. AutoFS. Let's go ahead and let that installation finish. All right. So let's go to server 2 and do same thing. We give it a host name. We set an IP configuration, and then we install some patches. So host name CTL set host name server02.mygsdlabs.local, and then the IP address and nmcli connection show, and then we have in this case we have wired connection 1, right? So let's configure that one. So nmcli connection modify wired connection 1, then IPv4. Then we'll give it. By the way, let me close this connection in quotes. .72.16.19.8/24 72.16.19.2. Close that. Ambiguous. So why is that? Let me just look at the syntax quick, right? Grep IPv4, let's do connection show instead of modify. Sorry. And then we have IPv4 addresses, right? So that was the typo in there. So IPv4 addresses. Alright, let's fix that. And that went well. Alright, next thing we need is a DNS. Again, we set it to the IPA server, the 5, and the method to manual. MCLI connection down, wire 1, and then MCLI connection up, wire 1. I should do it, yum install, and then if you remember the package where NSS PAM LDAP, and then PAM underscore QRP5, and then AutoFS. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to server 1 and then complete the configuration. A couple of things that I want to talk about before we start doing the LDAP configuration. We use the auth-config command to configure our LDAP, our server for LDAP authentication and Kerberos authentication. But I just want you to note something interesting. Before you run the auth-config command, you don't have a directory called etc open LDAP and then CA search, right? That directory doesn't exist. That directory actually gets created as we run the auth-config command. So we run it, and then it's going to tell us to copy the certificate for the server in that directory, but we cannot copy it, beforehand. But it's expecting to have that certificate already there before you complete the auth-config. So this is what I do, right? So we do auth-config and then text user interface. It's kind of a graphical interface to configure your LDAP server, and then we will say use LDAP, and then obviously we let it use the shadow password because we want to make sure that we can use local accounts as well. LDAP authentication, then use Kerberos. And when you click next, you will see it's going to ask you if you want to use TLS, and yes we do, and the LDAP server address, which in our case is ipa.mygsdlabs.local, and then the base DN. The base DN is basically your domain, which is local, and then mygsdlabs, right? Perfect. So mygsdlab local, and then we have the right name. Perfect. Now here is asking you for the realm, the key distribution center, and the admin server. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let it discover that using resolve it using DNS, and that should be fine. And here is when it tells you, well, now you need to copy your certificate in PEM format on the etc open LDAP and then CS search. So at this point, you already created that directory. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to open a shell and then SSH into the server and complete and copy the certificate and have it prepared before I hit OK, right? Because when I hit OK, it's going to do some configuration. I want to make sure that the certificate is there by the time I hit OK. So it's important that you do this first. So I'm going to go and open my shell here. All right, I'm going to SSH on that server as roots. 172.16.19.7 password. I'm there. So I'm going to hop into etc open LDAP and then CA search. Right, so in working directory, as you can see, there's nothing in there. So we don't have any certificates for for our server to configure itself for, to access LDAP. But if you remember, we copied our certificate to the public directory of the FTP server on your IPA server. So to do that, we do wget, and then we say FTP column / IPA.mysd, labs local /pub /ca.crt. So that's gonna take the certificate and copy it on this directory. If you do ls, you will see the certificate is there -lz. The problem is that the certificate since we copied it from an external location, we might have some issue with SE Linux, so we need to, I always like to do this anyway. So restore con and then ca.crt, just to make sure that SE Linux is not going to complain about it, right? So we can exit out of that server and we go back to our server, and now we can hit OK. So once we hit OK, it's going to do some configuration in the background, and then server should be configured. So we get back to it in a second. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on the. Oh, well, it's right. Let's just get this one over with, right? So let's see if we can actually authenticate using LDAP. So if you remember, the account that we created for LDAP was called LDAP user 1. As you can see, we can log into LDAP using 1. That means that we can, we have access to our LDAP server. One thing though is that we do not have the NFS home directory, right? And it says it cannot create the NFS home directory. If you look at if you remember, we published the home directory for this user account using NFS. So we need to use AutoFS to do that configuration. So we'll get there in a minute. Just first, let's make a directory. Although once we start using once we enable AutoFS, it will create a directory by itself. But I like to create it and give grant some permissions, right? chmod, and then since this is a home directory, we don't really need to do this, but I don't want to troubleshoot, so NFS home, and that's it. So next thing is to edit the etc auto.master. So the auto.master is the one that has that you can tell it what to do whenever you try to access a specific directory. So in this case, we say whenever you access NFS home, do what I'm going to tell you to do on etc auto.nfs home, right? So that should be it. So let's go and create the etc auto nfs home file. So vim etc then .nfs home, auto nfs home, right? No typos. Okay. So now here we would tell what to do. We would tell AutoMount what to do whenever we try to access that directory. So we say whenever any user tries to connect, use the options read and write, and connect to ipa.mysd-labs.local, and then column / and then NFS home, then follow slash, and then we tell that we give it the %. Right, the % basically is gonna say just mount the folder that matches that username, right? So this % represents that that asterisk that we have at the beginning. So escape out of there. AutoFS should be ready. So we write, and then we say systemctl start AutoFS, and then systemctl enable AutoFS. All right, so that's done. So now if we say su -ldap user 1, then you will see that it takes a little bit of time because it's trying to get that home directory prepared. So now if we say print working directory, pwd, you will see that we are on the NFS home LDAP user 1, which is what the home directory that we publish by NFS for this particular user. So let's hop into server 2 and do the same thing. If you remember, we left server 2, we're installing some packages. So at this point, we should be ready to configure server 2 for LDAP authentication as well. So let's do that. So auth config, and then we use the text user interface. Configure for LDAP authentication, then Kerberos. Perfect. Next, the server is not complaining, so it's not missing any packages. So we pass on the LDAP server, which is ipa-server-dns for local, and then the base DN again, which is the domain name, local, and my-dsd-labs. Perfect. Next, here we're gonna let the server find the service record by DNS for all the Kerberos stuff that we need, the realm, the key distribution center, and the min server. So we click OK, and then it's telling us the same thing. Remember, it created the etc open LDAP CS search directory. So now we have to go back and make sure that we copy that file over there. So let's SSH to 8, which is server 2. And we're going to hop into etc open LDAP, then CS search. So print working directory, we are on the right place. So now we grab the CS cert for the LDAP server and we drop it on this directory. So wget ftp column / ipa dot, and then /pub /ca.crt. All right, so we have it here. Restore con. And that's it. So we go back and we hit OK, and we should be good to go. So when it's done, so right now it's, again, it's writing some configuration files, and so now we're going to configure AutoFS. So we do the same thing, vim etc auto.master. If you remember, the directory that we have for NFS published from the server is NFS home. We tell it to do etc and then auto.nfs home. And this is everything you need to do in this file. So we just exit out of there and save it, and then we will create the etc auto.nfs home. And again, we do the same configuration. Star, so we allow any user to use it. The settings will be read and write, so mount the directory as read write. And the service ipa.my-gsd-labs to local column / NFS share, NFS home, NFS home, and then %. Okay, so we exit out of there, we save it. Let me see, NFS home, perfect. Master is NFS home. Just make sure I don't have any typos, because so far it's not complaining, right? But there might be some errors. So let's create a directory, mkdir, and then we will create the NFS home, and ch mode, let's grant full rise to NFS home. All right, so now you just need to start AutoFS and then enable AutoFS. Perfect. So let's see if our user works now. So it says cannot change directory to NFS LDAP user 1, no such file directory. So this is probably, let me see what's happening here. Exit out of there. The directory is there. So I don't understand why. FS home and then LDAP user 1 and then ls, so we can access it and everything. So let's try it again. And that worked. Well, you know, maybe something was happening in the background. I was trying to mount the directory and whatnot, but if you can see, we are on the NFS home LDAP user 1 directory. So at this point, these two servers have been, you know, properly configured to use the LDAP server for Kerberos and for LDAP authentication. So this is a requirement for when you start doing your Kerberos NFS. You know, I've seen quite a few videos online of people trying to explain, you know, Kerberos NFS, and I've seen a lot of problems. So I want to make sure that you don't go through those problems. So, you know, go ahead, get these servers, you know, configured for LDAP and Kerberos authentication, and that will make your life simpler later on. By the time we start doing the Kerberos NFS videos, I will show you how to create the key tabs. So you have to create your key tabs on the IPA server, so I will give you a command to do it. So we do that in a later video. What I would do right now, you don't have to do it, but what I would do right now is take a snapshot of this server, because this server is kind of bare metal, right? So if later on you want to, you know, play with it and you do a ton of configuration, you know, you can always restore your snapshot, and you know, that will work fine. All right, so thanks for watching, and I hope this video was informative.